son, the eldest son, the only son with Sarah of Abraham. Abraham and Sarah have one child, and that's Yitzchak. And just as Abraham and Hagar had one child, and that's Ishmael. So I'm going to share a document with you because that's going to be the principal focus of what I'm going to talk about today. So just give me a minute here so that I can do that. I get confused with my buttons sometimes, to be honest with you. No, that was not the right thing to do. Let's see. No. There we go. All right. There we go. So now I'm going to share a screen with you so that you can actually see what I have. And I'm going to test to make sure that you are seeing the document. So here we are. Are you all seeing a document? And on the top of the document should be the name Isaac. The document is called the Notes on Bereshit. Do you all see that? Oh, you're muted, so you can't, but you can give me a thumbs up. Peter says he's sees it. I just want to make sure everybody else can see it, because if not, then we'll have to make some other adjustment. I've also sent this document over to Jeremiah, who is in the process of making it available on the Clearwater Baha'is website. So if for any reason you can't see this, and certainly if you want to save it to your computer, you can go to the website, and as soon as it's available, you have to find this presentation being given, and then there will be a link to getting the document. So what you see at the top is the name Isaac. Then in parentheses, you see the name of Isaac in the Hebrew spelling, Yitzchak. You see it in Isaac, which is the Greek spelling. And then finally, Ishaq in Arabic.
And
the reason
Farsi.
why I said, what?
And Farsi.
Yes, because Farsi in this case is taking the name directly from the Arabic.
Right.
As we find very often in the Baha'i writings, many of the, especially names of historical persons, are taken from the Arabic form. So these are the reason why I've put all three of them there is that the story of Isaac is found in, first of all, in the Hebrew Bible. Yes, the Hebrew Bible, for which we have something called the Masoretic text and the Masorah, which is called the majority or the traditional text. The Masorah is going to have, has been translated into English, and that's what we generally read when we're reading. And the Ishaq that's in Greek is in a translation that was made approximately 300 years, 200 to 300 years before the Common Era. That's BC. That's, in other words, we're now in the year 2023. This would be probably around 2,300 years ago. Okay, so that the translation was made into Greek. There are other translations that were made that have been cited by various scholars through the ages. The reason why it's important is because it was taken on by a number of Christians. So the Christians spread this particular, the Greek translation, all over the world, literally. And, before, it was from basically the Greek translation that you had derived the Vulgate, which is in Latin, and the Vulgate was used by the Roman Catholic Church. And it was exclusive language for the Bible in Europe for many, many years, for many centuries, I should say, until basically the first translation that was accomplished in Europe that was into another language was probably Tyndale, who translated into English in the 1300s, followed by the next important translation was by Martin Luther in the 1500s. So this is a very long time when you consider that during that previous time, the text was known to Christians in the Western Hemisphere, in Europe, and also that it happened in the New World as well. It was known principally through Greek first and then Latin. The people who preserved the Greek version, once it was translated into Latin by the Roman Catholics, was the Orthodox Church. And the Orthodox Church is actually the whole of Eastern Mediterranean, and including Turkey, including Russia, including Ukraine, for example. Originally, they all used the Greek version, and then eventually it was translated into their vernaculars, into Ukrainian, Russian, and Bulgarian, and Gregorian, and Armenian, all these different languages. So, and then the reason why we put the Arabic is because the way that people in the Middle East, and particularly Arabic speaking people in the Middle East, knew the Bible was in the Arabic translation. They're very early Arabic translations. And in particular, there was one that was carried out by a very highly respected leader of rabbinical Judaism, whose name was Sadia al-Fayumi. He came from a town called Al-Fayum in Egypt. He was also called Ha-Gaon, because Gaon was the head of the community in Babylonia. And he had that distinction of being chosen to be the head of the community. A brilliant, brilliant man who did many extraordinary things in service to his people, including translating. Probably, we don't have all of the translations still to this day, but we have enough pieces that it looks like he translated the entire Old Testament into Arabic. Arabic, because Arabic was the lingua franca. It was the language used by everybody at that time. We're talking 9th and 10th century Middle East. And the Jews, most of the Jews were speaking and reading and writing Arabic at that time. This was also true of Maimonides, the greatest, probably greatest theologian of Jewish history. And he was writing in Arabic originally, and then there were translations into Hebrew, but there was only a minority of people who could read it in Hebrew. Most people were reading whatever he wrote in Arabic. So so why is that relevant to us? It's relevant to us because the Jews that came into contact with Muhammad and with Muslims after him were Jews who spoke Arabic, and they were not. Probably few of them had any knowledge of Hebrew. Maybe only some of the priests knew Hebrew, but most of them knew some Arabic. And so Muhammad would have encountered Jews and encountered the Bible most likely in Arabic. And likewise, Muslims would encounter in their dialogues with Jews and with Christians, they would have encountered the translations of the Old Testament into Arabic. So all three languages actually are very important for us to be acquainted with. It doesn't mean that you have to learn them. It just means be aware of the fact that these texts were available in those languages, and that there are important differences between the accounts found in those three languages. Then I've listed some links here. They're links that are well-researched and valuable for two reasons. One is that they're quite brief, so they state the basics, which is always helpful. Secondly, they have very good bibliographies and citations. So if you want to do more reading, you can do it and know that the sources they're based upon are very well researched. They're very solid sources. So I put those in there because you may want to do more research and more reading, and that is a good place to go. Basically, links to these kind of resources is the equivalent of going to a library, except the library in your town probably doesn't have these books, doesn't have these articles, doesn't have these summaries. It's available on the internet for free to everybody, any place, and that's one of the miracles of our time, is that knowledge has now become so accessible. So I wanted to begin with some takeaways from the story of Isaac. Of course, in this course, we can't really begin the text in the first page and go all the way to the end. It's too much reading. It would take too much time, and it wouldn't really be of any benefit for us because we wouldn't have time to talk about what the meaning is. So that would require a much more in-depth and lengthy course, which hopefully I hope someday to be able to offer, because I believe that the in-depth systematic study of the Bible would be a tremendous boon for Baha'is. I think if we had the opportunity to do that, it would not only make a huge contribution to our own spiritual life, but it would give us an opportunity to speak with confidence to our relatives and friends and all of our contacts, including on the internet, about their faith and our faith and how the two relate to each other. The relationships are ubiquitous. They're all over the place. So I'm going to begin as far as takeaways from the story of Isaac. The first thing I'm going to mention is that Isaac was the result of a miraculous birth. Isaac did not come into existence in the normal fashion. His mother was very, very old, and his father was very, very old. And she had never had a child. And he prayed to God, and she prayed to God, and they were given an assurance. They were given assurance, you will have a child. You will have a son. And the story actually is found in the 18th chapter of the book of Genesis. So if you go there, you can read the whole story. But this is a synopsis of the story, which I pulled from two different places. One is the announcement that it's going to happen. Now, of course, if you're familiar with the Gospels, you know that Elizabeth, the cousin of Mary, mother of Jesus, received an announcement, right? And Mary's husband received an announcement. Joseph received an announcement. So this kind of an announcement about a miraculous birth is found in the case of both John the Baptist and Jesus in the Gospels. And it's a major, major announcement in both of those cases, especially in the case of Jesus. This became one of the central doctrines of Christianity, was the miraculous birth of Jesus. But for some reason, it's not as commonly known that Isaac had a miraculous birth. But that's the truth. The truth is, his mother was barren, could not have children. God says you will have a child. She laughs. It's one of the story, she's laughing under her breath, right? And then God is saying to Abraham, wherefore did Sarah laugh, saying, sure, shall I of a surety bear a child which am old? Which is old English way of saying, how is it possible that I could have a kid at this age? And then, of course, Here's this wonderful statement. We know Bahá'u'lláh says this too. Is anything too hard for the Lord? The obvious answer to that is no. God can make anything happen, and he does. So the second excerpt is from chapter 21, and it says, the Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did unto Sarah as he had spoken, for Sarah conceived and bare Abraham a son in his old age, at the set time of which God had spoken to him. In other words, the prophecy of God was fulfilled, and it was fulfilled with the birth of Isaac. So that's the first takeaway I think we have from this story, is that his birth is a miraculous one. It's foretold, and it happens exactly as it was intended. The second one is that he is the first son and the only son, but we'll get to that. The fact that he's the only son has another significance, but he's the first son of Abraham and Sarah. And this demonstrates a principle called primogeniture, which is the principle that the first son is the inheritor of certain privileges and responsibilities that are generally not given to other members of the family. We'll come back to this at the end because of the role of primogeniture in the history of prophethood, and in the history of the Baha'i faith, and in the history of the world order of Baha'u'lláh. So we get the most clear statement here you have about primogeniture in the story of Abraham and Isaac is what his mother says. His mother says to her husband, says, you need to turn away this servant woman who has had a child with you, because otherwise she will compete with me over who should be the heir. And because her child came first, she will have good cause to compete with me. So she insists that she is sent away to another location where she will not be able to compete for that heritage. And this is the first we have this very strong statement that Isaac is to be the heir of Abraham, not Ishmael. So the next takeaway is also related to this son, and that is that this son of Abraham and Sarah is called in the Greek text monogenes, which means only begotten. This ends up being extremely important for Christians. The reason being that in Christianity, Jesus is seen as the only begotten Son of God. And this is seen as being an absolutely essential doctrine of Christianity. In fact, there were any people who called themselves Christians who didn't believe in this were treated as heretics, and they were basically kicked out. They were not allowed to remain as members of the Christian community. So I put a lot of detail here on where this expression of monogenes or monogene is found. That's a Greek word. The extant original text of the Gospels is in Greek. And in many cases, that when that Greek is quoting from the Old Testament, it is based upon the Septuagint, because the Septuagint was a very highly widely distributed translation of the Bible into Greek. However, when you study carefully each of the citations from the Old Testament that are found in the Gospels, you find that this is not the case. They are not quoting the Septuagint. In many cases, they are quoting some other source, or possibly the author translated directly into Greek from an original Hebrew or Aramaic manuscript. So I cite this for the purpose of pointing out that the language is very similar here, and this was noted in the Epistle to the Hebrews, which I've misspelled here. It's Hebrews, not Hebrews. There, we'll turn. There we go. In the Epistle to the Hebrews, which is one of the books that follows the Acts of the Apostles, that follows the four Gospels, you have this statement: by faith, Abraham, when he was tried, offered up Isaac, and he that had received the promises offered up his only begotten son. So he's identifying Isaac as the only begotten son of who? Of Abraham. And the same exact term is used in the Gospel of John, referring to Jesus as the only begotten Son of God. There's a great deal that has been written by Christian theologians comparing the sacrifice that Abraham was called upon to make of his son, of his miraculously born son with his wife, his only son with his wife, with Jesus. And these are indications of this connection and why this is an important theme for Christians. Now, I want to go on to the next one, which is I want to talk about what happened to the first son of Abraham, which is his son with Hagar. Hagar had Ishmael before the miraculous birth of Isaac. And there are some indications in the text, in the Old Testament text, that there is a future for Isaac. I mean, for Ishmael, for this son of Hagar. But they are very fragmentary, and they're really not understood until you come to Islam. I'll get to that. So first of all, this announcement here in the 21st chapter of Genesis is Abraham was very concerned and very upset that his first son, which is the son with Hagar, that his wife Sarah insisted that they no longer live in the house. And I'm not going to have a rival living in my house. This is not going to happen. My son Isaac is going to be your inheritor. So he's upset, and God speaks to him and says, let it not be grievous in thy sight because of the lad, and because of thy bondwoman. In all that Sarah hath said unto thee, hearken unto her voice. For in Isaac shall thy seed be called, and also of the son of the bondwoman will I make a nation, because he is thy seed. So the descendants of Abraham will have an important future. That's being called a nation. And later on in the same passage, God appears through an angel to Hagar and says, what aileth thee, Hagar? Fear not, for God hath heard the voice of the lad where he is. In other words, of this son, Ishmael. Arise, lift up the lad, and hold him in thy hand, for I will make him a great nation. Now, another indication we have of this. There's very little actually that's found in the Old Testament documents, the Old Testament text. Another indication is talking about the generations of Ishmael, Abraham's son. And it talks about their various names. And it says that Ishmael had 12 sons, 12 princes according to their nations. This turns out to be a very important parallel that's noticed by Muslim commentators and also pointed out by Abdu'l-Baha. The 12 sons of Ishmael are reiterated by the 12 imams of Muhammad, Muhammad being also a descendant of Abraham. So the big event that people remember Isaac for is the event that was conceived of by God as a test of Abraham's faith. And what a test it was. The son that he'd yearned for all of his life, the son that he considered more important than himself. He would have sacrificed anything for this son. He waited for this son until he was an old man and only got this son when he asked for divine intervention, and the Holy Spirit brought this son to him. And what happens is God calls him and says, "Take now thy son, thine only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I will tell thee of." And then he reiterates it later on. When Isaac asks his father, "Where's the sacrifice?" You know, he takes his son Isaac to this place. He doesn't tell him what's going to happen. And he says, "Where's the sacrifice?" And Abraham says, "My son, God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering." So they went, both of them together. The important thing for us to recognize is that Abraham is ready to kill his son. He stretched forth his hand and took the knife to slay his son. And it's at that moment, that very moment, that an angel calls him and says, "Stop." Says, "Lay not thy hand upon the lad, neither do thou anything unto him. For now I know that thou fearest God. Seest that thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, from me." Then we have, believe me, we could talk about that for days. There are clear echoes for Christians in the sacrifice of Jesus, the only Son of God, in comparison to this only son of Abraham being offered as a sacrifice. But as Baha'u'lláh has pointed out, all of the manifestations are sacrifices to God. All of them serve as ransoms for the sins and errors of humanity. All of them are redeemers as a result of that. All of them take onto their shoulders the evil actions of human beings and serve as intermediaries to secure our forgiveness and to secure our edification, our enlightenment. But this is an eternal theme, is you have to be willing to sacrifice everything for God. And when that test is endured, when you have shown that you have that degree of faith, then everything becomes possible, because then the faith is real. Then the commandment that Jews recite every single day, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Echad. That means the Lord God is your Lord, and he's one, the oneness of God. And then later on it says, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy spirit, and with all thy strength. There's nothing left, right? God is to be the reposit. He's to receive all of our love, and everything else in the world comes as secondary and flows from that obedience and that love. The next takeaway that I wanted to share is the blessing given to Abraham, and it affects Isaac, of course, because it comes through his son Isaac. This is not a blessing in general. It doesn't say that that this blessing is going to go through all of his sons. It goes through this particular son. And he says, by myself have I sworn, saith the Lord, for because thou hast done this thing, what is this thing? Is offered up your only son. Thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, that in blessing I will bless thee, and in multiplying I will multiply thy seed as the stars of the heaven, and as the sand which is upon the seashore. And thy seed shall possess the gate of his enemies, and in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because thou hast obeyed my voice. Then the next one we have is the principle which is derived from this offering of his only begotten son, which regulates the lives of the Israelites. And that principle is to sacrifice the first fruits of the harvest and to dedicate the firstborn of one's family, the firstborn son, and to dedicate the firstborn of every herd and flock. In other words, every sheep, every goat, every cow, every animal that you have in your possession. And all of those firstborns go to God. They're dedicated directly to God. So I found the verses to show you where the first fruits is spoken of. As you see, it's a book it's in the book of Genesis, it's in the book of Deuteronomy, it's in the book of Exodus. I said Genesis, but I made it Exodus. Again, this is a theme for certainly an article, probably a book, and it's been the theme of many sermons, undoubtedly, by rabbis and by priests and ministers, because it's speaking of a principle of how life was organized for thousands of years. Now we come to another takeaway, which is that it was at a certain point, Abraham realized that it was time for Isaac to be married. Of course, he had to be married. In order to carry out this divine promise of multiplying his seed all over the world, he had to have a wife. So he was going to be very selective. He says, I'm not going to let my child to just marry anybody, because he knows that the great influence of the wife can have on the husband, and usually does. So he doesn't want him to marry a woman of Canaan, because they're living in the promised land, but it's the land of Canaan at this point. And the people of Canaan are not monotheists. They're polytheists. They don't follow the will of God. They don't listen to the voice of God. They have their own ways. So he says, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to send my son. I'm going to send my servant to my family. It turns out to his brother's house. And I'm going to send you to go and find a suitable wife for Isaac. And this description of this trip and of the results of the trip is very detailed. It's so very interesting to me, and I think it will be to you, to read the whole thing, because instead of being, it could have been conveyed in a sentence, but it's not. The whole story is told and then retold, because not only, you see, first of all, the messenger who is sent, the servant who is sent on this mission, is given a charge by Abraham, and then he describes that charge to the people that he encounters when he goes to the land of where the family is located, the family of Abraham, who were back in Chaldea, or in Haran, as it was called. And then, but the story gets told like 3 different times. And then finally, it's told, see, that's why you see I've got excerpts here from the page, because it's a long passage. And the final one is Abraham makes a prophecy of how it's going to happen. And then it happens exactly as he intended, exactly as he predicted. And then he goes back to Abraham and he reports back to Abraham and he says, see, I did exactly what you asked me to do. And this is the woman who is chosen to become the wife of Isaac. This is such an interesting story for lots of reasons. One of the reasons I find it so compelling is that the family, the brother of Abraham, is a believer. He's a monotheist. Somehow the family became followers of God. They live in a polytheistic society. And Abraham went to another country to establish a monotheistic society, but somehow the word got back to the family, and the family converted. And so consequently, when the story is told to them, then they accept it right away. They believe it must be true. And then finally, the last part of the story is when they arrive, this messenger, this servant, and Rebekah arrive. And Rebekah lifted up her eyes, and when she saw Isaac, she lighted off the camel. That means she jumped off the camel. For she had said unto the servant, what man is this that walketh in the field to meet us? And the servant had said, it is my master. Therefore she took a veil and covered herself. Why'd she do that? Because she's modest. And because this is going to be her husband. She realizes that. And she doesn't want to appear to him, except by being very modest. And the servant told Isaac all the things he had done, and Isaac brought her into his mother's tent and took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. And Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. So, mission accomplished. Not only did he bring back the wife that was predicted by Abraham, but he brought back the wife that would be loved by Isaac, and with whom he would have children, and begin this process of multiplying the seed of Abraham that would be an eternal process. And finally, we have for speaking of Isaac, we have what Isaac does at the end of his life. And Isaac sends Isaac called his first son, who is Jacob. We'll talk about Jacob tomorrow. And said, "Thou shalt not take a wife of the daughters of Canaan." So the same theme that his father Abraham had said. And so he sent him to go and find also a wife, and among his family, because again, it wasn't just that they were family, they were also monotheists. They believed in God. They believed in the God of Israel, as they call it, but Israel wasn't born yet. He was only born with Jacob, when Jacob was converted and became known as Israel. So you have the blessing. So the blessing of Abraham is recapitulated by the blessing of Isaac upon his first son. And this pattern is going to repeat itself over history, and it becomes the foundation of the Jewish people. And it becomes also the foundation of the connection of Abraham with Christianity, with Islam, and with the Baha'i faith. I wanted to mention, though, what happens to Esau, because just as Ishmael was exiled, in effect, from the home of Abraham at the insistence of Sarah, Esau also was exiled because he was the son of Isaac. There were two sons of Isaac, Esau and Jacob. Jacob was chosen for the inheritance, and Esau was not. And when he was sent away from the family, it says, "Then went Esau unto Ishmael." He went to Ishmael, which is his father's first son. So you see, the generations now are meeting up and reconnecting with each other. Esau went to Ishmael and took unto the wives which he had Mahalath, the daughter of Ishmael, Abraham's son, the sister of Namajoth, to be his wife. So these were the takeaways that I got from the story. And if you read the story, you might find some other ones that you thought were particularly important points. But I think this is enough. This is certainly more than I was expecting. Prior to preparing this course, I was only really aware of the sacrifice, the offer of sacrifice of Isaac by his father Abraham, and I have to admit, I didn't understand the details of it until I studied it really carefully. I wanted to bring up now another question, a question that is of particular interest for us. Before we look at the question, I wanted to suggest that maybe we could take, if there are any questions now, let's take them now about these takeaways, and then we'll go to the next theme of this presentation. So I will unmute you so that you can have that opportunity to participate. Now let's see, did that work? There, I have asked you to unmute. Okay, but you have to click unmute in order to unmute.
Yes, Peter, I have a question.
Sure.
with the, you know, the descendants from Abraham. Where does Zoroaster come into the picture?
So Zoroaster is not part of this lineage. Zoroaster has a different lineage, as does Buddha, as does Krishna. They have different lineages, and they are not. They're, as far as we know, there's no blood connection. There's no genetic connection between these prophets of the Old Testament, this lineage of Abraham. You see, the Bab was a descendant of Muhammad, which makes him a descendant of Ishmael, which makes him a descendant of Abraham, but of Ishmael, and therefore of the great nation that was promised to Ishmael, not of the covenant of Israel that was promised to Isaac. And then the Bahá'u'lláh is descended both from Sarah and from Keturah. Keturah was the third, I guess you would say, wife. Hagar wasn't technically a wife. She was a slave. She was in bondage. So she was acting as a servant for Sarah and had a child on behalf of Sarah, because they thought that they were never going to have a child of their own, Sarah and Abraham. So Keturah is apparently someone he actually married, and married after Sarah had died. And so he had 6 sons with Keturah. He only had 1 son with Hagar and 1 son with Sarah, but 6 sons with Keturah. And according to the genealogies that we've been furnished, Bahá'u'lláh is descended both from Sarah, that means from Isaac, and also descended from Keturah. Keturah through the Persian connection, which would have been the various kings of Persia. And this is attested in a number of written sources. The descendants of through Isaac is discernible through the context that Baha'u'lláh says that he is basically the Davidic king, that he fulfills the prophecies of being the king born to the descendants of David, or the shoot out of the stem or of Jesse. Jesse was the father of David.
Yeah.
So
okay.
clearly, if he's the descendant of David and the descendant of Jesse, then he has to be the descendant of Ishmael. Of Isaac. He has to be, because Isaac is the great grandfather. Okay, it just, when you look at the lineage, it has to work that way, and you could see the whole lineage up to the time of Jesus. You can see those lineages in 2 of the canonical gospels, in Matthew and in Luke. There are a couple of changes. There are a couple of variations between the 2 of them, but most of them are pretty much consistent all the way through. And by the way, we must always remember that the descendants of David ended up with Joseph, not with Mary. Mary was not identified as being a descendant of David by anybody. And Joseph, of course, was the stepfather of Jesus, not his actual father.
Thank you, Bishop.
You're welcome. Anybody else want to say something before we go on to the next theme? All right, so I'm going to go on to the next one. And before we actually look at the passages, and these will be passages from the Baha'i writings, I want to introduce you to a principle that was spoken of by Shoghi Effendi, by the Guardian, in The Promised Day is Come, and in God Passes By, and in other places as well. But the most clear statements and comprehensive statements are to be found in those two sources. I'll read them to you. The fundamental unity of these messengers of God is clearly recognized. The continuity of their revelations is affirmed. The God-given authority and correlative character of their books is admitted. The singleness of their aims and purposes is proclaimed. The uniqueness of their influence emphasized. The ultimate reconciliation of their teachings and followers taught and anticipated. Not only have the peoples of the earth ignored, and some of them even assailed, a faith which is at once the essence, the promise, the reconciler, and the unifier of all religions. But they have drifted away from their own religions and set up on their subverted altars other gods wholly alien, not only to the spirit, but to the traditional forms of their ancient faiths. In conclusion of this theme, it should be stated that the revelation identified with Baha'u'lláh abrogates unconditionally all the dispensations gone before it, upholds uncompromisingly the eternal verities they enshrine, recognizes firmly and absolutely the divine origin of their authors, preserves inviolate the sanctity of their authentic scriptures, disclaims any intention of lowering the status of their founders or of abating the spiritual ideals they inculcate, clarifies and correlates their functions, reaffirms their common, their unchangeable and fundamental purpose, reconciles their seemingly divergent claims and doctrines. Readily and gratefully recognizes their respective contributions to the gradual unfoldment of one divine revelation, unhesitatingly acknowledges itself to be but one link in the chain of continually progressive revelations. So that's the background. The reason why I'm quoting the background is because one of the aims of the Baha'i faith is to reconcile the religions of the past. It's to bring them together and demonstrate that they are teaching compatible truths. So we have a big issue here, really big issue. In the Bible, it says that Abraham offered Isaac as a sacrifice to God. In the Quran, it says that Abraham offered Ishmael as a sacrifice to God. So which is true? Is it one or is it the other? How can we reconcile these two statements that seems to be so clearly in contradiction to each other? Here we have our first quoted discussion of this subject, and it's from Baha'u'lláh. It's from Baha'u'lláh in a recent excerpt of a tablet that was published at the behest of the World Center. By the way, the World Center is now publishing online before they do anything in print. And whatever they publish online can be found at Baha'i.org, or it can be found at Baha'i Reference. Either one of those searches in Google will get you to your destination. And then you have to choose, do you want to find, are you looking for writings of Baha'u'lláh? Are you looking for Abdul Baha, Shoghi Effendi, and so forth? So this is from one of these newly translated tablets. And it's responding to somebody. Speaking of that person, he says his first inquiry concerneth the fact that in the scriptures of the past, Isaac is said to have been sacrificed unto God, whereas in the Quran, this station, that is, the sacrifice unto God, hath been revealed and recorded for Ishmael. What he hath mentioned is undoubtedly the truth. All people must, however, fix their gaze upon the word that hath dawned from the horizon of divine utterance. It is incumbent upon every soul to ponder its sovereignty and pervading influence, its might and all-encompassing power. There can be no doubt that these matters are confirmed and proven only through the Word of God. It is the Word of God that standeth supreme over all things. It is the begetter of the world and the educator of its people. It summeth them that wander athirst in the vale of separation to direct their steps towards the ocean of reunion. It illuminateth the darkness of ignorance with the morning light of knowledge. Consider how in this day, 1 minute, just 1 minute.
He's so fast.
Yes, 1 minute. I'll be right with you. I'm going to finish this quote and then I have to take my daughter to the toilet. Consider how in this day all those who believe in the scriptures of the past accept that Isaac was a sacrifice unto God, whereas the people of the Quran affirmed the same station for Ishmael. This despite the fact that it is clear and evident to every possessor of insight and understanding that to outward seeming no such sacrifice took place, and all agree that an animal was sacrificed. Meditate, therefore, on the reason why a person that hath gone to the altar of sacrifice for the beloved, and yet hath come back alive, was clothed with the robe of divine sacrifice, and was invested with the ornament of his acceptance. There is no doubt that he attained this station and was adorned with this mantle through the agency of the word of God. Thus, the appearance, the realization, and the fulfillment of every name, station, and created thing are all dependent upon the word of God. I'm going to leave you the next passage to read while I bring my daughter to the toilet. Okay? I'll be right back.
I'm ready.
Thank you for your patience.
Thank you. I have a question.
Yes.
We have a writings from the Bab who says, I wish this Abraham of yours, means himself, the Bab, had 1,000 Ishmael to sacrifice all of them in your way or for you.
Exactly.
This is from the
Exactly.
Bab.
Yes. And And Baha'u'lláh explains or reconciles the two traditions in this way. I'm just reading from the very end. He says, for this reason, Isaac and Ishmael are both sacrifices, as are indeed all the true servants of God. This station is one of the necessary attributes of the stars of the heaven of divine unity. And this is Abdul Baha explaining this. And there's another tablet in which he explained that there were two Ishmaels. There were two Ishmaels, and there were also talks about there were two Davids. But that's bringing us too far astray from our content. But someday we'll talk about that. In other words, when you look into Baha'i writings, you will find these things quite frequently, where rather than running away from what we assume are irreconcilable statements in the scriptures of different faiths, Baha'u'lláh takes them on directly and explains how if you look for the spiritual meaning, you find out that there's no problem to accept that both are true. And so, yes, if you have an account of Isaac being sacrificed one place and of Ishmael being sacrificed someplace else, there's no harm in that, because the purpose of the story is not to establish a historical event that has exclusive character. The whole purpose of the story is to talk about God is testing Abraham, and in other words, he's showing by testing Abraham that he's testing us. This is what we get tested. We get tested all the time. We have to be willing to sacrifice what is most precious to us. And if we are willing to sacrifice it, it means we are detached from it. It means that we put God first. When we put God first, then we can find that we can have all these things that we love, including the people we love the most. There's nothing wrong with having those people. The end of the story is not that Ishmael or Isaac is killed. No, that wasn't the purpose at all. It was to find out, would you be willing to sacrifice what matters most to you to God? Or are you not willing? If you're willing to do it, then you truly love God. Then that means that you have given your life to his service. And if you have, then all things are permitted to you, including your beloved son, your best beloved. So this is one of the reconciliations that you find in the Baha'i writings. Another one is there is this controversy amongst Christians about original sin. Many Christians traditionally believe that all human beings are born sinful. And Abdul Baha explains that this is not possible. And this is one of his most strong statements, and a statement that actually includes a reference to Isaac, which is why I've included it here. It says, the majority of Christians believe that Adam sinned and transgressed by eating from the forbidden tree, that the dire and disastrous consequences of this transgression were inherited for all time by his descendants, and that Adam has thus become the cause of death of man. This explanation is irrational and clearly mistaken, for it implies that all men, even the prophets and messengers of God, through no fault or sin of their own, and for no other reason than their descent from Adam, became guilty sinners and suffered the torments of hell until the day of Christ's sacrifice. This would be far from the justice of God. If Adam was a sinner, what was the sin of Abraham? What was the fault of Isaac and of Joseph? What was the transgression of Moses? Sometimes in the in the Persian original, but Abdul-Baha is described as Mubayyin. Mubayyin means the one who makes clear. And very often this is what he does. Based upon the teachings and the principles of Baha'u'lláh and on the inspiration of the Holy Spirit which he received so perfectly from Baha'u'lláh, he was able to reconcile religions. In many cases, it was his arguments that have created that reconciliation rather than statements made explicitly by Baha'u'lláh. Now, another principle that we see in the story of Isaac is the principle that prophetic heritage, the heritage from the prophet of Abraham, includes prophets in his own family. Now, this might come as a big surprise, especially to Westerners who are not familiar with the Quran. In the Quran, Isaac, Ishmael, Jacob, Joseph, as well as Moses, Aaron, David, and Solomon are prophets. All of them. They're all named as Nabi'in in the text of the Quran. So in that context, Abdul-Baha says this: among the great prophets was Abraham, who, being an iconoclast and a herald of the oneness of God, was banished from his native land. He founded a family upon which the blessing of God descended, and it was owing to this religious basis and ordination that the Abrahamic house progressed and advanced. Through the divine benediction, noteworthy and luminous prophets issued from his heritage. There appeared Isaac, Ishmael, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, Aaron, David, and Solomon. I will leave the rest for you to read for yourself, but that was the point that I wanted to share with you. Related to that is the law of primogeniture, which I mentioned before in the beginning when we were discussing the birth of Isaac and of Sarah objecting to Hagar staying in the household and being part of the household, considering that she would vie for her son to become the inheritor of the mission and of the task of Isaac. And so here I'm quoting from a letter dated the 8th of February 1934 from Shoghi Effendi, where he's talking about the law of primogeniture. Primogeniture being the law that gives special responsibilities and opportunities to the firstborn son. In the verses of the Kitab al-Aqdas, the implications of which clearly anticipate the institution of the guardianship, in the explanation which Abdul-Baha in one of his tablets has given to, and the emphasis he has placed upon, the hereditary principle and law, the law of primogeniture, as having been upheld by the prophets of the past. And here you have primogeniture, which, as you will see, was not only followed in the case of Abraham and Isaac, but it was followed from there on as a basic rule of thumb. And then finally, we have this reference by Abdul-Baha and also quoted by Shoghi Effendi in The Advent of Divine Justice, where he's talking about the results of banishment and migration. And in particular, this is this was cited by The Guardian to encourage the American Baha'is and beyond them Baha'is in general to pioneer and travel teach, to move, to understand that it is necessary to be leaving your place of origin in order to serve the faith of God. He said this exile became the cause of the progress of Abraham's descendants. This exile resulted in their being given the Holy Land. This exile resulted in the diffusion of Abraham's teachings. This exile resulted in the appearance of a Jacob from the seed of Abraham and of a Joseph who became a ruler in Egypt. This exile resulted in the appearance of a Moses from that same seed. This exile resulted in the appearance of a being such as Christ from that lineage. This exile resulted in a Hagar being found, of whom Ishmael was begotten, and from whom Muhammad in turn descended. This exile resulted in the appearance of the Bab from the lineage of Abraham. This exile resulted in the appearance of the prophets of Israel from the progeny of Abraham, and so will it continue forevermore. This exile resulted in the whole of Europe and most of Asia entering under the shadow of the God of Israel. Behold, what a power it was that enabled an immigrant to establish such a family, to found such a nation, and to promulgate such teachings. Now, can anyone claim that all this was purely fortuitous? We must be fair. Was this man an educator or not? It behooves us to ponder a while that if the emigration of Abraham from Ur to Aleppo in Syria produced such results, what will be the effect of the exile of Bahá'u'lláh from Tehran to Baghdad, and from thence to Constantinople, to Rumelia, and to the Holy Land? Behold then what an accomplished educator Abraham was. So, my friends, I am going to stop screen sharing because I have shared everything that I wrote, and I welcome your comments and your questions. And I think probably by now this document is on the website. If you wanted to have a copy for yourselves, you can go and download it.
Peter, that last statement was so dramatic. I think it just leaves all of us speechless. And where did you say that was the Guardian talking in what? God Passes By?
No, the Guardian cites this talk.
Yeah, where?
He cites it in the Advent of Divine Justice.
Okay.
Because he's encouraging the American friends to pioneer and travel teach. Right?
Right.
So,
do you know what page? What page?
I don't, but if you do a search, you will find it. Just do a search under his name.
Yeah, I
for
will.
Abraham.
It's cool. It's so cool.
Well, and it brings it home. It brings it home, and this is, I think, so important for us never to think that these principles that have been revealed by manifestations sometimes seem so far away, so far exalted above us, but they aren't.
Long ago, yeah.
It's meant for everyday people to understand. You know, I should be able to explain this to my 4-year-old daughter so that she understands that when we have to pick up stakes and move someplace, because that's how I can serve the cause of God.
Yeah.
That she'll understand.
I totally
Yeah, thank you, Peter.
I completely got it. Thank you.
What'd you say, Peter?
Sorry. Yeah, thank you. Just awesome.
Well, you're welcome. I have to I'm so curious about those of you who are living so far away from where you originally came from. Did you end up there?
Well, I came across a book in the library and it just rung all bells with me, you know. Then eventually I pioneered to Scotland for 26 years.
26 years. God bless you.
Then I came back to Allier 10 years ago.
And you're
So
laying
yeah,
the seeds. You're planting the seeds in this island.
yes, of course. There's only 2 Baha'is on the island, on Allier, but there's some on Anglesey and in Bangor. So we have a community close by, you know.
Mhm.
Yeah, so it's just planting seeds, you know.
Yeah. Well, planting seeds. We'll be planting seeds for a long time.
Yeah,
Peter,
and
I'm so
of course, Abdul Baha visited Liverpool.
Yes. Well, and yes, exactly. And he said, don't be worried about the response because it's not important. You're planting the seeds and you don't know how they're going to develop and how they will and at what time and in what way. There's no way for us to know that. But as long as we create I think what the Guardian kept reassuring us is that we need to create a permanent presence wherever we go, so that when we leave, because we're all going to leave this world, that we don't leave without a successor. There needs to be somebody who's going to carry on the job, carry on the seeding. Yeah. And because eventually all of these places where there's just 1 or 2 Baha'is, there'll be a community. And once there's a community, the community will grow. And everything, this is all a very organic process, but we'd never know when the conditions will be right.
Yeah, sure.
And so George is in where are you in George? Are you in Bristol?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
You're in Bristol. And did you go do you consider yourself a pioneer in Bristol? Is that how it feels to you?
Well, I was pioneer when I left Iran to Africa, and then, but when I came to UK, it was at the instruction of Universal House of Justice that I should come here and study and get qualification, which I can get a job back in Africa. But it didn't work out, so I don't consider myself a pioneer, but serve the faith anyway.
Yes, but the House of Justice sent you to go someplace. So you actually traveled someplace different from where you were at the call of the cause of God. So you're definitely a pioneer as far as I'm concerned. Yeah.
Of course. But it is very interesting that 3 years before that, the hand of the cause, Mr. Abul Qasim Faizi, in one of his meetings, quoted a quotation from the book of Actas that was prophesied the coming of these mullahs. And he told, if you don't go for the sake of cause of God, go for your own sake. And then, of course, we had no desire really when going through the Baha'i reading and going to the classes. We had no desire but to serve the faith. The only 2 years that I worked in Iran was because to earn a living so that I could travel and go pioneering.
Yes.
And eventually we went to pioneering it was the end of the 10-year plan, which was leading to the election of Universal House of Justice and so on.
Mhm.
And then, of course, we obeyed. I mean, we couldn't think of anything else but going pioneering for the sake of God. The same with my brother has gone pioneering. My sister has gone pioneering. Everybody my age at that time, we went pioneering. We were already a pioneer in Iran anyway. We were in Roba Karim, which is 36 miles from Tehran, a
Mhm.
pioneering post. Grandfather, Hossein Mutlaq, who became a Baha'i for the first time at the age of 12. And his
Mhm.
mother threw him out of the house because he had
Ah.
become a Baha'i. And then, of course, at that time, because the woman could not work, he used to go and work and earn food and things like that, and throw it over the wall to her because she couldn't go. He couldn't go and give it directly to her.
Mhm.
So it is the history is very interesting. All my uncles went pioneering. My aunt went pioneering. Everybody went pioneering. We couldn't think of anything but pioneering.
Mhm. Yes, and where and now the reality is that even though technically you might not consider yourself a pioneer, you are not in your homeland and you're planting the seeds for the faith. So to me, you are fulfilling the same commandment to travel and to teach the faith. That's what we're all commanded to do.
Thank you very much for saying that. But it is in the hand of God, whatever God says. But if we can serve the cause in anywhere and any time, that would be an honor.
And in Bristol, what is the response at this time to the faith? Is there a community? Are there a few Baha'is?
There are 80 Baha'i, just under 100 Baha'is,
Wow.
and there are just under 100 Baha'is, and we have a local spiritualist. At Bristol was a place that the Abdul Baha came in his trip
Yes.
twice, and
Yes.
he praised Bristol for that. And I believe that these great numbers and the blessings has been as a result of his coming to Bristol. And we have a house in here that a flat that originally was a hotel when Abdul Baha came here, went and stayed in that in Royal Crescent in Bristol. And that now the Baha'is own that, and they have renovated for the people to come and visit.
And I know that Pauline is also uh, uh, some kind of a pioneer because you have emigrated to Denmark and that you're planting the seeds of the faith in Denmark. And you don't come from Denmark, that's clear. You would not be named Pauline Grolen if you were Danish. But
actually, I do have my former husband's surname, which is Grolin, and I grew up in Montreal.
You grew up in Montreal. I
Yes.
see. And what is the size of the community in do you live in Copenhagen or you live someplace else?
No, I live in Odense.
Audience, okay. And
Yes.
are there any Baha'is in that locality? Or I know there are lots of Baha'is in Denmark as a whole.
No, not so many. About 375.
375.
Yeah.
Then some of them to Pembroke Pines, Florida.
We have a local spiritual assembly.
Yeah. Oh, you do. You do. And do you have young people?
Not a lot.
Not a lot.
No,
Yes, I think this is the biggest.
Copenhagen, and this our focus area is a community, a neighborhood in Copenhagen, and so there were a couple of young Baha'is were asked to move there to support, because we have to have at least one cluster where there is reaching the second milestone. and to be a third milestone by the end of the plan.
When I was
Yeah.
in Northern
Have
Ireland,
it any other place.
I
We
used
don't
to
have it where I'm living.
You were saying,
when I was
George?
in Northern Ireland, I used to, when I was studying, wherever there was a vacancy to form a local spiritual assembly, I used to go. So I have lived in a community with the 3 Baha'is to the community which in Tehran, which was 50,000 Baha'is. So you have experiences of all these various situations and how it works and so on and so forth. So it has been an honor really to be able, God's blessing to be able to do this sort of thing.
I think that, you know, if we look at traveling for the sake of the cause, all of us have had that experience. Nosrat, I think you weren't born in Florida. I'm pretty sure of that, you know, and you traveled there and you are planting the seeds of faith in Florida, even though it's so far away from your homeland. This is all of us are responding in our own way, in our own capacity to the tablets of the divine plan, which is responding to this principle that's so beautifully described by Abdul Baha and that we inherit from Abraham. You know, the first one to do this apparently was Abraham. He was told by God, go to this new land. He had no idea where he was going, no idea at all. And he went out of faith and to plant the seeds for the establishment of his new revelation. And that's what we're all doing. That's what we're all engaged in. And the way I understand the text, he's saying this all came from this initial contact with the manifestation of God, with Abraham. And so we should understand that we're in part of this lineage and part of this progressive movement to take the word of God and to take the belief in God to everywhere in the world. And to not just take it there, but stay there, plant the seeds. Planting seeds is the work of a gardener. It's the work of a farmer. You know, you can't, planting seeds, you can't just sort of throw them on the ground. You have to tend them. If you don't tend them, you don't water them, you don't fertilize them, then they don't have a chance of surviving. And so I commend each one of you for the work that you do. Even your prayers are helping to nourish the seeds in your own communities.
I was born in Yazd, Iran.
In Yazd. Wonderful.
Is that right?
Yes.
That is where my grandfather and mother, both from mother's side and father's side, were from.
Yeah. That's the place that most of the martyrdoms.
That's right. There is a book called Tarikh Shohadai Yazd, 2 volumes. That published only one of them, but they couldn't publish the second one because it was so bad, that it was so rude and so on, that they couldn't even publish it. So they have published of the 2 one, and it was by Mr. Maulamiri, who was the father of Adib Taherzadeh.
Yes.
We have a friend here who has been presenting through the Clearwater Baha'i community. Her name is Violetta Zain. And Violetta has given a talk on the Baha'is of Yazd. I don't know if you heard her talk, but they have it archived. So if you haven't heard it, I really encourage you to check it out. She's very talented, very gifted presenter. And she, for some reason, and you know better than me, she fell in love with the Baha'is of Yazd.
Yes, I participated in her thing. It was amazing. It was fantastic. And there is going to be one in next year in March, April, or February, March. And it is about beloved guardian. And I think it is fantastic because she not only talks about it, she makes mention the main points, but it also refers to the issues that are really, really amazing for the history wise. And it is very, very uplifting. even if we don't remember, but still you are going to love it because it is very uplifting.
It's because of Violetta that I'm here also. I used to go to her father's storytelling on Sundays. And then after he stopped, she started. And I've been attending sometimes. And it's that's how I got on this mailing list.
Yeah,
Like
it's
father,
fantastic.
like daughter.
Yes, I could tell you that the reason why I'm giving this presentation and why I've been doing a series of presentations through the Firm Foundation Academy is because largely through my friendship with Violetta, because I met her and I saw the huge potential of her approach, her multimedia approach, which there's no way I can do what she can do. She's a very gifted graphic designer, and she's also not married and has no children. So she's able to immerse herself in her subject to a degree that unfortunately is impossible for me. And I asked her, would you please do a series of presentations on the Bahá'u'lláh and Abdul Baha that really tell the whole story of their lives? And she agreed to do it. And so we've been very, very pleased to have her do that under the auspices of our institution and a couple of other institutions, the Clearwater Baha'is being a very important partner. And we also have a Baha'i school in Arizona, which is very close to the grave sites of two hands of the cause, General Alai and Bill Sears. And it was established by the descendants of these two hands of the cause. It's called Desert Rose Baha'i Institute. Currently, they're doing an intensive study of the Dawnbreakers in that location. It's a wonderful program, and so I just wanted to say that that the contributions that can be made by the friends to our knowledge are so encouraging to everybody. And our participation in these Zoom sessions means so much to the presenter because it takes very, very a long amount of time to collect all the information that we want to share, and to have people who are eager to learn it, to benefit from what we spent years studying is very, very moving for us. It encourages us to continue to do it. So I hope that you will have a chance to also see the programs of Dr. Nejati Alkan, who is a Baha'i living in Germany, of Turkish descent, but from a special family of, I think, Alawites. So he speaks fluent Arabic as well as Turkish. And he's made the study, his area of particular study is the Ottoman Empire, and in particular the Ottoman Empire since the inception of the Babi and Baha'i faiths. And he's already given 2 talks, and he's slated to give a number of others. And the man is brilliant, absolutely brilliant, has done all this original research, and he translated tablets originally written in Ottoman Turkish into English, which were never available before. So that's something you can also find on the Clearwater Baha'i website. So does anybody else have something want to say, or shall we close out for today?
Your wish is your command.
Well, I'm going to ask you, George, will you please read or chant a prayer for us in Farsi? Will you be willing to do that?
Well, I'm afraid I have been out of Iran for so many years. My Farsi is not good at all. I can understand if somebody talks it, but I can't say it.
I understand.
Can't chant it really.
I understand. Maybe Nosrat would like to do that.
So if somebody else does it, by all means, that would be better, because my Farsi has become very bad. Even my brother, when he writes to us, he writes to me. He writes it in Farsi, and I answer in English because he is in Spain.
Yes.
But my sister is better because her husband is Persian, and so he has kept the Persian, and she studied in India, so her English is good. So every one of them has a reason behind it.
But Nosrat is not responding to me, so maybe she doesn't want to say a prayer. That's okay. No,
I don't mind. Oh, yes, anybody wants to say, please carry on. I was just trying to find a short English prayer. Can I say this little short one?
Of course, please do.
Yeah. God grant that the light of unity may envelop the whole earth, and that the seal, the kingdom is God's, may be stamped upon the brow of all its people. Bahá'u'lláh.
And I have one more prayer for you. O my God, aid thou thy servant to raise up the word, and to refute what is vain and false, to establish the truth, to spread the sacred verses abroad, reveal the splendors, and make the morning's light to dawn in the hearts of the righteous. Thou art verily the generous, the forgiving. Allah Apah, my friends.
Thank you
Hope
very
to
much.
see you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Hello, Appa.
See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.